Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
Greetings, gentlemen. Welcome yet again to another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. I am Scot McKay, at Scot McKay on both Twitter and Clubhouse. Real Scot McKay on Instagram. You can find the YouTube goodies by searching my name, SCOTMCKAY, on YouTube. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com, and the Facebook group is Mountaintop Summit on Facebook. Gotta join it, guys. It's growing, and we have a good group of guys. You should join us. With me today is a new friend of mine. I've already been a guest on her podcast, gentlemen, and you're going to love her. She's smart, she's quick on her feet, she knows her stuff, and check it out, she actually likes men. Gotta love that in today's world. She's been a coach for men for ages, but now she's kind of branched out into other sorts of coaching too, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit. But we're going back to her roots today. We're going to talk about you guys, and we're going to bring up a topic that's been a long time coming, and maybe a little bit uncomfortable at first to even address. But you know what? I suspect downloads are going to be really huge for this one, because whether it's under the cover of darkness or right out there in the open, a lot of us as men really do struggle with shame and guilt. Her name is Dominey Drew. She's from the eponymously named Dominey Drew Coaching. Dominey, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. Yeah,
for sure. We're glad to have you here as well. I don't know how exciting it is to talk about shame and guilt, but if anybody can do it, you can.
It's pretty exciting. We'll make it exciting. Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me drop a bomb on this conversation just to get started. I think one of the biggest shames, it's such a shame, right? We throw that around a lot. You know,
we do.
It's just an idiomatic expression. I think it's really curious that one of the things we feel most shameful about as men is the fact that we are even experiencing guilt and shame to begin with. And that's kind of a psychological state. But what it does is it keeps us trapped in our shame because, well, we're too ashamed. And we feel too guilty to actually bring it up with anybody because, hey, you know what? We might get shamed for bringing it up. That cascade of guilt and shame is kind of messed up, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of a quintessential negative spiral there where you just get trapped in your own experience. And it's interesting, where I thought you were going to go with that is it's so odd that one of the things that we're most ashamed of are the things that are the most natural. I really do find
true.
Both in men and in women. And I was in men's dating for many years, as you said. And, even as we were just talking about on my show, some dichotomies and some balances between the masculine and the feminine. And it's like so fascinating that the men would come and they would often have shame and guilt around their masculinity.
Yes,
right.
Which,
is a complex topic worth 5 hours of podcasting on its own. But now you bring that into today's world and you got 10 to 15 podcast hours easy.
Well, the good news is after almost 300 episodes of the show, we've covered that for at least 5 hours so far. So we've got you covered there.
Glad
literally.
to hear.
So yeah, I mean, it seems almost anti-masculine to admit that we would feel any guilt or shame at all. We're all supposed to be, I don't know, James Bond or John Wayne and just do what we want when we want because we wanted to, and the heck with the rest of you.
Right.
And it's just not human to expect that of ourselves, is it?
I mean, maybe it is human because here we are doing it. And yet at the same time, is it has evolved, right? Like, a couple hundred years ago, and certainly a few thousand years ago, the roles were very clear, right? They had to be clear because you guys had more physical strength. And that meant we could survive longer because you could hunt and you could protect us from things. And we had our role of things that we could do that you couldn't. And there was this balance, which over, the larger picture really evened out. And now we're sort of in this world where strength doesn't actually mean survival anymore. Interestingly, what we've linked that to now is actually money and finances. So one of the reasons people have such intense fears, not to mention guilt and shame, around money and success is because it's linked to our survival. So it's a huge deal for everybody. But I can't even imagine from the perspective of a female what it must feel like to be the stronger, physically stronger, and thus up until recently the most capable of surviving, right? That was dominant because it was important in that realm. And to be in this world now where that gift is not, it's not held the same way. It's not respected the same way. It kind of almost seems like feels like, you go to war at World War II and you come home and you're celebrated. Then you go to Vietnam and all of a sudden it's not like nobody wants war anymore. And you're like, wait, what the hell? Soldiers were supposed to be celebrated.
Yeah, you can feel guilt and shame over very similar circumstances to those whereby you'd feel very proud and gratified. And the only difference is based on how the public views you or the kind of feedback or input you're getting, right? That's screwed up in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that certainly it screws with your head, doesn't it?
Yes.
Like you're built for a certain thing and you're not allowed to do that certain thing anymore. And at the same time, there's this evolution, right? So like John Wayne, like that used to be the ideal male, right? And that's starting to change and that's starting to shift. And suddenly the men who maybe perfected that because they thought that's what they were supposed to be are not being appreciated by women in the same way, as much so. Certainly masculinity is still a popular thing amongst women, of course. But it's so fascinating to see everything kind of shifting and changing. And I think just that shifting and changing, despite the fact that it's on a much larger societal level, if not energetic collective consciousness global, is really resulting in a lot of shame and guilt just for being the way that you are.
That kind of plucks at our primal strings, doesn't it? I mean, what if somewhere in our archetypal nature, deep in our soul somewhere, or collective psyche, I don't know how deep you want to get into the metaphysical stuff here, but if you start delving deep into our personhood, this idea of being a strong provider, protector, is indeed very central to our masculinity, and indeed to our identity as men. And a lot of people nowadays are reporting they don't feel comfortable in their male or female body, either because I feel a different primal urge or I feel like there's something wrong with my primal urges. And a lot of people are ending up very confused. Now, I'm not saying that transgenderism is necessarily confusion.
Yeah.
And we're not going to go down that rabbit hole here. But I just think it's very interesting how a lot of people are just saying no to both masculinity and femininity and either go with a non-binary approach or say, I think I'd like to try on the masculine hat or the feminine hat on more. And they're saying to themselves, well, I've proven I can do this. Maybe I should like it. I can't help but hark back to what you said about the possibility nowadays that women can be physically stronger than men. And indeed, a lot of us guys do not value physical strength. We've got a lot of skinny guys who play video games all day and don't go to the gym and don't, frankly, see any social or practical need to be bulking on the muscles and the weight. And a lot of women are working out and they're getting involved in sports that usually, historically, I should say, have been reserved for men. And they're physically stronger. And I'll tell you what, one of the horniest things I can think of is play wrestling, as foreplay. I'll tell you what, I used to really enjoy women who had some athletic strength to them because they were just a lot more fun to wrestle around with in bed. And it was a lot of fun.
Yes.
And I still think that at the end, when a man can somehow cause the woman to be in a submissive role, somehow she gets hornier.
Yeah.
I think that's where the primal stuff kind of meets the real world, but it's still a lot of fun. And I'm certainly not intimidated by women who are physically strong, just like I'm not intimidated by women who are gritty and have mental toughness and who are smart and confident. And unfortunately, and by the way, this is a big and by the way, here it is, ready? A lot of guys, when we're already confused as to what our masculinity really is, let alone how we should represent it and what's toxic and what's virtuous in the 21st century postmodern world, we can see women exhibiting gifts and strengths that, women typically don't bother to exhibit or didn't feel free to exhibit in their own right. And we feel guilt and shame because that woman's got one up on us in that area. When the trick that's being played on us is these traits like grittiness, intelligence, aren't really masculine to begin with. That was part of a toxic way of thinking where women, weren't smart enough to vote or weren't capable of helping build bombers in World War II until we saw it with our own eyes, right? And I don't think we should be surprised that all these people, male, female, or otherwise, can participate in these human skills and feel these human emotions and even have these human traits, even as men and women are still free to attract each other by virtue of that type of primal masculinity and femininity that is indeed the catalyst for human sexual attraction. Men, providers, protectors, we're presiding over our world, building this safe space, holding this safe space, if you will, for femininity to play around in kind of a sandbox, right? And women feeling safe and comfortable, regardless of how much stress and strain and leadership she puts into a normal workday, coming home and relaxing into the arms of a man and being playful and fun and doing those feminine things that make life worth living. And we as the guy relaxing into that. And, so revolves the world. And all of that is importantly independent of how intelligent one is, how much mental toughness one has, how much one casts off victimhood and has self-reliance, etc., etc. But I think it's easy for guys to go, well, because I'm confused about who I even am as a man, it's easy for me to feel guilty or shameful when I see something out there that I haven't perfected that I feel like I should. And I don't even know why. It's just a tangled web, isn't it?
It's almost more useful if a person is coming at, okay, I'm decided I'm going to strip it down and see who I actually am. It's almost more useful, I have found, to answer that question without adding a gender into it. Because there are a couple of different things that we're talking about. We're talking about male versus female, but we're also talking about masculinity versus femininity, which is not male or female in nature. It's an impulse. How deep do we want to go? Pretty deep. So we talk about the yin versus the yang, right? That's the balance of life, literally. Bring balance to the force. Call it what you will. So all talking about the same thing. And so you've got these different elements of life, the expansion and the contraction, and both are necessary in order for life to progress, right? So exactly, as you said, those traits aren't particularly masculine or feminine. They were sort of dominated by the masculine because as society kind of went forward, we went, oh, they're stronger, so they must be able to lead better. Again, those two things were linked with strength, and you guys had strength in spades, and so we had that. But there's so much societal and historical and honestly energetic, genealogical, right, ancestral issues around masculine femininity and what they mean, that I think if you're looking to look inward, which I think the people in the show have prioritized in your life, and good on you for it. If you're prioritizing the question of who am I, it may be easier actually, although perhaps counterintuitive, to ask who am I rather than who am I as a man. Because your masculinity that is authentic, that is not toxic or put upon or guessed or put there because you think that that's what people want, men or women, the authentic masculinity will spring forth from you effortlessly, right? When you get rid of the story, which of course is like, oh, in my head, masculinity means a thing. Forget it for a second. Forget that you're a male as opposed to a female. You're just a thing. You're just a person. Who are you? And from that perspective, it can create some space for who you actually are to actually present itself, right? To kind of unfurl, which interestingly is a feminine image. Even if you're seeking your masculinity, if you can create some space for it, the way your masculinity will come through is actually in a bit of a feminine wave, in the sense that you give it some space and it comes out authentically instead of kind of, digging for it or pursuing it in kind of more of an active way. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I trust on behalf of all the guys listening that they hung in there with you until you completed your point. Because the way you started it off, I'm guessing maybe some of the guys were beginning to get a little ruffled by it. But the way you brought it around made perfect sense. And to kind of underscore what I especially love about what you said, you first have to find the kernel of who you are at your very primal core being. What do I believe? What am I passionate about? My identity isn't masculine or feminine. My identity is human. My identity is holistic, spiritual, psychological, even, yes, physical. Now, as a bit of an aside here, I don't want to go on a tangent, but a lot of guys just have no style, Dominey. Mm-hmm. And I think that's because they don't understand that once I know who I am, what I wear, how I present myself, how I act, the car I drive are going to, well, to use your term, spring forth from that representation of my identity. Mm-hmm. I'm just not going to gravitate towards generic things anymore because I don't feel like I have to fit in, especially if I don't know where I fit in, because 100%. I know who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, see?
Yes.
There you go. Now we're getting somewhere. Well, we're getting somewhere anyway. And by the way, in case you guys don't know, when Dominey said, as we were talking about on my show, what happened there is we just finished recording an episode of her show. So let me be clear there. We've been on a roll here for like an hour now, maybe more. So if we hit the ground running on this one, well, we're coming by it naturally and effortlessly.
It's springing forth authentically.
Oh, it's wonderful. I love this show already. So see now, the masculine and feminine piece of it is a meta level piece. It's a layer on to your humanity. I mean, it's kind of like a plug-in to WordPress if you're a geeky guy who likes to code sites,
Yes.
you know. It's something that you add on to it. It's like your culture or your upbringing or your patriotism or your faith. All of those things are adjunct to who I am as a person. Now, I have guys who come to me, for example, Dominey, and they go, well, I'm really sexually horny for women. And I feel really guilty because
Yes.
I know that's really predatory for me to want to have sex with women. And I'm like, why would you feel guilt over that? You're a man. You're heterosexual. I mean, what's a heterosexual woman to do if there aren't any heterosexual men out there to be horny for? You know, it's a primal thing. And when you come to grips with it, then you won't be so blown and tossed by, well, wait for it, what other people think and what they tell you you should do. Dominey, I talk about good character, bad character, and a third element, which is no character.
Yes.
No character is defined as, well, I haven't figured that out yet. I don't know really what's right for me. I don't really know what I believe. So therefore, I have to kind of bend and flex to my particular audience or the echo chamber I'm entering into right now. And importantly, nobody respects that.
Yep.
And then that feeds this vortex of guilt and shame. Like, well, I'm ashamed because I don't have it together as much as these other people do, but I don't even know where to start. And, you know, let me backtrack a little bit. Where we should have started with this whole episode is, what's the difference between guilt and shame? You want to go ahead with that, or you want me to kick that one off?
Well, you know, there was something that you just said that I wanted to touch on, but you're right. That is an important place to begin. There's an underlying current here that's underneath both guilt and shame, which is self-rejection, right?
Yes, indeed.
Self-judgment. I'm not okay. That has to be true.
Or lack of even knowing who I am before I can even accept or reject myself. But yeah, you're right.
And it may not be conscious, but there's a vague sense that you're not okay, right? There's a vague sense that you're not really good enough. Like,
and see,
that's
real. What I would call the shame.
Yeah, and it really could be either one. I lost my marriage because I wasn't good enough can slide right into guilt. I mean, it's a bit of a spectrum there.
Well, the losing of the marriage is what you're guilty over. That's the action. That's what I did.
Right.
Shame is the feeling I had of inadequacy or I'm bad. And then the guilt is over something that I did or some action or some thought, some verb.
Focus more on action or a thing that happened, than who you are.
Yeah, okay. So we're on the same page. Yeah, cool. So we killed two birds with one stone there. So continue.
So I think this undercurrent of self-rejection is really, really important. I have one of my programs I call The Art of Authenticity, and it's literally exactly that. It's how to be yourself, right? Authentically. And there's a module in there, one of the steps is called The Art of Invincible Happiness. And you touched on it there when you're talking about the focus that we have on what other people think. And my goal, because this really doesn't create, because a person is already whole, but it really allows one to like reveal their wholeness when they are able to reach that place of invincible happiness, which they get to by creating the happiness within so that it's there regardless of what's going on around them.
I have to interject something here before you continue. My program for guys on how to be unstoppably confident because they have identity and know who the hell they are is actually called Invincible.
Yes!
We should sue each other. We stole each other's stuff. Now you just get it, and I get it.
Without
and the
even
eternal
knowing.
trends are common to
Awesome.
humans.
Yes. And you can teach them on any level. You can teach that with just like coaching, like, okay, write down these 3 things and gratitude like on a coaching level, or you can take it to an enlightenment level. I mean, psychological, wherever you want to land, the truth is the same, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? This guilt and shame kind of paradigm, and it's so common now. I think it's gotten really huge, plays a huge part that is in the anxiety and depression that people are feeling all over the place, right? Because that comes from the initial place of I'm not okay as I am.
Dominey, when I finally achieved spiritual peace in my life?
Tell me.
When I realized I wasn't in charge. I didn't have any real control over what the God of the universe wanted to do with me. what the God of the universe wanted to do for me, and indeed, what the God of the universe wanted to do to me. I am a created human. I am at the whim of that which created me. The more I try to figure God out, the more I place expectations on God, the more I say, bless me, do this for me, and I start ordering the God of the universe around, the more guilt and shame I feel because I'm inadequate to be in that driver's seat. And instead, I felt gratitude for being born, for the blessings I have, and just started trusting the God of the universe to be trustworthy. And that's extremely important because I went to college with a bunch of people who would say, I can't wait for that person to burn in hell for eternity. And it always rubbed me the wrong way because I can't trust a God who fosters that kind of attitude. If we're created in God's image, I can't imagine punishing my children like that.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
I learned that my only option is that the God of the universe, considering there are blessings in the world, is indeed the author and finisher of all of it, good, bad, and the ugly. And I have to trust it because there's no other choice. And I'll tell you what, I let go of so much guilt right then and there. So much fear based on that guilt. Like, what have I done? I'm going to get punished for it. And I realized myself and 7.5 billion other similar creatures all over the world, regardless of race, color, gender, and indeed creed, are all pretty much in the same boat. All of us as humans. That doesn't make me a Unitarian Universalist. It makes me humble, more so than I was, and it makes me more grateful. And what do you know? It worked. See, if I feel like I'm responsible for everything, I'm not going to be capable of everything, and I'm going to fail. And you know, I'm getting to a hot potato here, which is, it seems like a lot of times guilt and shame are a direct result of a dogmatic, organized religious expression that one was brought into, or coerced into, or really born into by accident. And so such people, of course, end up not being sure why they believe and can't really even explain why they believe it. So the question then becomes for a lot of people, do I believe it? But I found a lot of people don't even have the willingness to explore that belief because they feel too much, wait for it, shame to even express that desire. It's kind of a dirty little catch-22, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
But Dominey, anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts that you would share with men or women or anybody really. I don't think this is gender specific. About what to do if you were raised in a particular belief system, any kind of worldview really, and now that you're an adult, you really would like the freedom to explore that and perhaps think differently. But you want to do that without feeling like, well, I'm going to burn in hell for this, or my family's going to shun me for this. Man, religions just love to use separation from community as punishment, don't they? You know, come to think of it, that's all tied to the human desire to be part of something bigger, I'm sure. Anyway, Dominey, what would you say to people who are feeling like that? That's a heavy question, isn't it?
So this is not a thing for some people who have been raised that way. Every single person has been raised that way. You're specifying a particular religion and perhaps a claustrophobic one. And certainly a lot of people have that experience. But even if it wasn't that, you've been raised with a certain dogma. Whatever your parents had or whatever you brought on yourself to rebel against what your parents had, you're operating within a template, a way of being that for most people, they've never questioned whether or not it is in fact theirs.
I think that's an extremely intuitive point. Continue.
So there's this way, and what a beautiful microcosm, because as you spoke of your journey of letting go, right? We talk about letting go of the ego, and again, it's turned into the soundbite. What does that even mean? Well, it means releasing your agenda, accepting that life has a flow and you're a part of it as opposed to it being at your command. Of course, you conduct your life intentionally. You know, that's a way to make it the happiest. And so if we call that intentionality the masculine wave, then the surrender is the feminine. And there is this balance. And the beautiful thing about the story that you just told is that as you release let's call it the small self, right? The self that you identified as who Scot McKay was. As you released that and let go of that guilt and the shame and came into self-love, which from a traditionally religious background may seem selfish, as you took that step and stepped into your self-love, you actually come closer to the experience of the divine. That is the place. As you stepped into self-love, right? Like the irony here is people push them, make themselves small to make their idea of God larger. When you actually release that, when you experience that surrender that you just led by example there so beautifully, you actually come into a more experiential experience of that divinity, right? Of that place in yourself. And that's what the people who are showing up in the religious templates are seeking, actually.
Well, I think it's very interesting that you would acknowledge that no matter how we grew up, there was indeed dogma there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, even if you grew up in an agnostic, atheist, or flatly non-religious environment, you've been taught to believe something.
Oh, sure.
Nowadays, I would argue that in the secular, humanist, postmodern world that we live in, politics are very much becoming our religion, at least collectively. And man, are people ever getting dogmatic without even realizing it?
Yeah.
Good grief.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the political equivalent of Bible thumping is, but boy, we are doing it to each other on Twitter for sure. I mean, we really are.
We really are.
It's like you're going to hell because you don't believe in my God. No, you're going to hell because you don't believe in my God. And the most heartbreaking part is those are gods with a small g, not a capital G. They're human politicians and leaders and people we're told we should look up to, but it's still the same exact time-worn psychological concept, only with different trappings. We're being told to believe something, and if you don't believe it, you should feel shame over it because you're wrong. Get on the right side of history or else,
Yep.
Right. It's mind control. It's if you don't do this, there's something wrong with you. And for goodness sake, you don't want anything to be wrong with you, do you? So fix it. Do better. In other words, you're a toxic male. Do better. What else am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to replace that as a man? Well, figure it out, they say. It's mind control. It's a game. That's people plucking at the strings of shame and guilt to increase their own personal power to the diminishment of yours. And see, that's what you've been talking about so eloquently so far, Dominey, is that this shame and guilt serves to diminish us. And it doesn't do a whole lot of good for our self-esteem, for our self-respect, or for our self-confidence, does it? Well, how do we dig out of that hole and get a grip on this?
Yeah, and that's 100% true. I mean, to carry on with the religious thing we've been saying, to reframe what you just said, those are the false idols.
Yes.
Here, believe this, go here, here's your golden calf. And it's like, okay, that's bright,
oh my
shiny.
gosh,
I mean, isn't that our
true.
entire world right now?
Yes.
Right? And so it's not about, and religion's such a fun thing because it's already the historical template's already there, so you can see it very clearly. It's not about one faith better than another. Like it truthfully never has been. It's just, your connection with your direct experience of God. That's what every religion has been seeking. And they've done it on their own, different ways, which of course has led to a lot of issues. So the guilt and the shame, the self-rejection, if we continue on with the way we've been talking about it, then the self-rejection, if you see yourself, if you can even imagine yourself as some semblance of a divine being, it doesn't matter what that means to you, but somebody, with a spark, right, of source, of all that is, right?
Well, even if I am a divinely created being, I'm a product of this relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some guys listening will bristle at the concept of us all being gods. Full disclosure there. But I mean, the fact that you're divinely created is suitable for this conversation, correct?
Yeah. Either way, the worth is inherent. The worth is inherent, right? It can be found. So to reject yourself is to reject that which you are saying you love. That which you are saying is so wonderful. Like, right? That is not love, right? Love is a direct experience in your body. I think it's very common, societally, for people to think also that guilt and shame are useful, like they're tools. Like, oh, I work out at the gym because I hate my body. Which, if that motivates you, like, that's totally cool. That's fine. But I do want to create a little distinction here for anybody who's out there who's like, yeah, but if I had no shame, I would walk around naked. Like,
well,
probably
hell yeah.
not, though. With possible exception of my current host. But
have you ever read Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey?
No, I haven't.
Well, there's a wonderful story about the time that actually made the news when it happened, when he was arrested naked in the middle of the night. And he refused to put on clothes because he figured if he was frog marched naked out of his place in Austin, Texas, it would prove that, he must have been innocent because, good grief, he's buck naked and everything. And he'd been playing the bongos loudly and smoking weed, and the cops got called on him, and they came and arrested him. And they started selling T-shirts afterwards in Austin saying bongo naked on them. But really, to hear him tell it, it comes off as if it was an excuse to, be in public naked because he was proud of himself.
That's pretty
In
funny.
case it's not obvious, by the way, I'm certainly no Matthew McConaughey.
I just specified that, most people wouldn't want to be walking around naked. Not there's anything wrong with not walking around naked. It's not about, yes or no. It's not about that. It's about whether or not you're shutting down your impulses and why. Because that's what results in shame. I am not okay. You're shooting yourself. I should be some other way. I should be thinner. I should be better. I should be richer. You're shooting on yourself. You're shooting on your friends. You're shooting on everybody, on society. Women should do this. Men should do this. It's the art in this. And if I get one thing across, I hope it is this, is that those shoulds, that structure, that template, that thing that you've always seen to be truth, to be society, to be you, is in fact a template. It is a series of beliefs and perceptions, most importantly, that you have taken on to be so intensely yours that it seems like it's reality. And that line there is seamless right now. But what I do when people work with me is we wake up out of that. What is actually you? Who are you really? It's like a Yoda experience. You land in mud in my backyard and I go, the world's not what you always thought it was. Let's start here. Right? Because once you start seeing reality for what it is, everything fucking changes.
Yeah, I'm completely in lockstep with you on that. A couple of things to add here before we close. First of all, I want to make it perfectly clear that if you're listening to this and you're a proponent of a particular religion, Christian, Buddhist, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, I completely respect that. As long as you do.
Oh, yeah.
As long as you have a basis for what you believe and you can defend your faith, then I respect you for that. It isn't all about being iconoclastic towards a particular faith and embracing some nebulous, universal whatever. I really respect anything you can defend. And I mean, too few people nowadays in particular have come around to the point where they're comfortable playing in that arena because it might get too challenging to what they don't yet have figured out. But I think a good benchmark as to whether or not we as humans really have solved much of this identity puzzle is we're okay with someone else disagreeing with us. It's not a threat. It's simply a conversation. We talked about on your show, Dominey, that the universal indicator of ignorance is, we called it the battle cry of the ignorant, right? You're an idiot. Probably spelled Y-O-U-R, right? And I think that stands alone because it was good enough for your show, so it's good for these guys. It really says it all.
It really does.
The last thing I want to say is, we talked about there really being love and fear in this world. And if you don't love yourself and if you aren't at peace with yourself, then there's fear going on. And that fear is what drives the shame and the guilt.
Yes.
And you get rid of the fear and you start boldly, confidently, and courageously facing it. Come to grips with who you really are. Gay, straight, Catholic, Protestant, whatever. I respect that. And you'll respect that because suddenly you love yourself. What a great conversation. I love how this has come full circle.
Yes, agreed.
Her name is Dominey Drew, and I've set up a special URL where you can get on her site, find out more about her, and much like I do with you guys, she invites you to get on the phone with her for free for 25 minutes. If you resonate with her and what she's about, she may be the coach for you after all. Go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com/Drew, D-R-E-W, because frankly, it's easier to spell on the fly without having seen it written before than Dominey, right? But definitely go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Drew and get you some. You already know she's smart. You already know she's talented. She knows what she's doing, gentlemen. Check it out. Thank you so much, Dominey, for being on the show. I hope you'll come back.
That was my pleasure. I will come back anytime. Thanks so much for a great conversation. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Yeah, we've talked for 2 hours straight, and I feel like we could go for another 24.
I know,
it could be
right?
a marathon. Hey, maybe we could take over where Jerry Lewis left off and run a telethon, maybe for a good cause someday.
I'm in. Whenever that happens, I'm in.
Right on then. And gentlemen, guess what? If you haven't been to mountaintoppodcast.com lately, I got some pretty good news for you. We've reunited with the guys over at Keyport. Go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Keyport and check out the coolest everyday carry devices you have ever seen. This is not your grandpa's Swiss Army knife, gentlemen. This is 21st century stuff. I'll give you a quick hint, just as kind of a teaser. You can open your garage door with this thing, among other things. Okay, www.mountaintoppodcast.com/Keyport. Check it out. And go ahead and check out the other fantastic sponsors, including Origin in Maine, the best jeans you've ever worn in your life. They will last longer than you and probably fit better. I don't even know what that means, but it just kind of rolled off my tongue. Anyway, they're called the factory jeans, the ones I wear. They're also Delta jeans. Good stuff. Get the fit that matches who you are the best and get 2 or 3 pairs because you will never need any other pairs of jeans ever. You can work in them. Then you can go out on the town and get into a bar brawl with them and look stylish while doing it. If you're wearing Origin jeans, you look stylish doing anything and you're ready for anything. HeroSoap.com is where you can find absolutely natural soap to clean you up. If you do not have the body wash, take a nice warm shower with a female human being and rub that stuff all over each other sometime and just see what happens. It will be magic, I promise. Say no more. You can find all of our sponsors at mountaintoppodcast.com, and when you partake of any of the fun goods from any of our sponsors, use the code MOUNTAIN10 to get an additional 10% off. And while you're visiting the site, much like Dominey does, as you know, gentlemen, I too offer 25 minutes free to talk to me about what's on your mind and see if coaching with us is a good fit. And you can do that by signing up at mountaintoppodcast.com. I have a lot of other brand new things going on over at the site that you probably have not seen before unless you visited within the last couple of weeks. It's all there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.